Discovering the Truth. I'm your host for tonight, Fahima Mahomed, where you'll be watching Sincere Community Services on this platform, bringing new Muslims every week to discuss various topics and issues. Sincere Community Services are a platform to help you discover the essence of Islam, the truth, and its real meaning. If you want to log on, you can too on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And to find out more information, please go and visit our website on www.findtruth.co.uk. As we have been having each week new guests and we are discussing different issues, it's no different tonight. And I have with me my guest revert for today is Sara Jamil. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well. I'm sorry if we had any delays or any technical issues. We do have our scholar that's going to be joining us tonight, and I will introduce him when he is ready to come. Today we're going to be discussing the actual issues around the challenges of the cultural clashes. Now, we do have a lot of cultural clashes, not just within our Muslim community, but actually, I think it is noticeable more when you're entering into Islam from a different background, sect, or even completely new religion. So, as we mentioned before in the show, that reverts do come from mainly a different faith. But a lot of us actually nowadays call ourselves reverts when we finally get to understand our religion, when we have entered into a particular sect or we decide to follow and we've chosen our path, which is who we have tonight is our guest in her situation. Now, Sara, whether it comes from, Salaam alaikum, how are you? We have with us today,
Wa alaikum
just in
salam wa
time.
rahmatullah.
Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Sheikh Ahmed, Haneef. An absolute pleasure always. And I hope that you will be able to give us some of your insights. I was just explaining to Sara and the rest of our guests tonight that we are going to be discussing the actual issues and challenges when you're entering into Islam and coming into a culture. Because a lot of our Muslims, they do come from a set background and they do have the cultures which can be a bit of a clash when you're entering into it. I also said that our guest tonight is a revert, considers herself a revert, but everyone, majority of the time, think that they come from a different faith. But sometimes when they are learning of a different particular sect, then they feel that they have now an understanding of what it is that they actually believe in, and they now have taken on their religion in a much more serious way. And that is also them reverting into knowing the truth and practicing it, and which is our guest tonight. I will come to you in a minute, Sara, but I just want to come first to our Sheikh tonight. When it comes to cultural clashes that new Muslims face, and I know you have a lot of people that come to you with regards to this issue, what is your experience, Sheikh, as to what are the actual cultural clashes that new Muslims are facing when they're entering into the religion of Islam?
Yeah, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It's interesting, right? But it's a kind of it's a difficult question. I tell you why. Because when I embraced Islam in Canada in about 1980 or so, Islam was a religion that was spreading in the Afro-American community following the death of Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm.
And so for most of us, it was a very comfortable and easy transition. It is only, it is only when, for example, I started to meet or attend gatherings in the heritage Muslim community that I became aware of cultural differences. However, because of my experience with other African American Muslims who whose Islam was one that was dealing with social reform and finding an alternative to white supremacism as manifested in the imagery of Christianity and their ideology and so on. It was something quite comfortable. But a lot of young Muslims get into cultural or experience cultural conflicts, or cultural, issues with the heritage Muslim community. And incidentally, I think that those issues are not with the younger people, okay, the young generation, because the young generation, um, tends to share many attitudes and ideas of the wider society in which they live, and the only positive, I think, or the most positive thing that stands out with them with respect to converts is one of welcoming and brotherhood and things like that. Okay. However, you find that in the centers, okay, which are still under the control of their parents, or the older generation, you would find certain attitudes and practices that sort of alienate them. For one thing, for example, and this is evolving out of that. It's changing. One of the practices is the use of the language of the home country, as the language of communication.
Yeah.
So for example, if they hire a speaker to come and speak on, let's say, for Muharram or Ramadan or something, that speaker will be giving his speech in Arabic or Urdu or whatever community center that quote unquote Islamic center is, And I remember my, the early invitations I had gotten to give lectures, for example, in places like Birmingham or London and so forth, and in Canada as well. You found that at one point the English programs used to be held outside of the main center, in a tent, where you had all the kids and everybody else and so forth. And the major speech was inside, which was in the normal language. Then you have, for example, things like stereotypes. Okay, stereotypes. I remember in one particular Islamic center in Birmingham, there were a lot of Afro Caribbean brothers who some of them had embraced Islam in prison, right? But others had embraced Islam because of that struggle against white supremacism, in religion. And they frequented a particular masjid in Birmingham, which scared the the goers of that masjid. Okay, scared them to death. They started. They fell into stereotypes. These guys are going to sell weed in the masjid and stuff like that. So you had you had and these guys were very cool dudes. They were quite on their deen. You know what I mean? They used to scare the Wahhabis to death, which was really good. But they had this type of attitude, you see, and unfortunately, these brothers stopped attending that masjid, and they lost a very important center for them to congregate. Then you have, for example, the case of white converts. No, white converts. I think it's a sort of there's a contradictory type of a relationship with them. From the point of view of the heritage community, a white convert is prime meat to marry because you're going to be moving up the caste ladder, to get some nice little light colored kids. You know what I'm saying? So they bend over backwards,
Yeah.
to marry them. That's on one level. On the other level, you'd find that white women converts were seen as loose, right? This idea of sexual promiscuity being
Mm-hmm.
something that they apply to the general white population, and so they apply it to these women. So you have very interesting types of dynamics that take place. For example, sometimes in marriage, a man might marry a white sister who is a convert and then would like to know later on how many relationships she had in her life. You see what I mean? Which, when you ask these types of questions, then he starts feeling all insecure and stuff like that, and he treats the woman in a bad way. You see what I mean? So you have that type of these type of dynamics taking place. Alhamdulillah, fortunately, I think our community, the general Muslim community, is evolving. I say evolving because we're not changing voluntarily. We are changing with the rise of a new a generation that is grounded in this society, that shares some of the positive values of this society, and a lot of these problems are going away slowly.
Thank you so much. You've raised so many issues, and it's interesting to hear all the different scenarios that you've raised. And you're absolutely correct. Depending, on your own state and background and where you're coming from and who you are, you will have a different viewpoint and perspective. And speaking to my guest Sara, even before the show, we highlighted several other issues as well. And it's funny that you even mentioned about the color and caste and background, because that is very prominent up till today. And I think everyone will have their own take, especially when it comes to revert Muslim women who are actually taken advantage of, looked in a particular way, and sometimes not actually treated in the best manner, which we will go into. But before we go into that, Sara, what are your sort of experiences, whether it's from yourself or your peers around you, that you have come across that we highlighted before with regards to the cultural clashes? It's slightly different, especially as a female, especially looking at it from an inward personality, that you are young and you're actually in there in the community hearing things differently. So what is your take on this topic?
I really like the points raised before because I can relate to it a lot, especially the language barriers. I think all reverts, whether they're transitioning from one sect to another, whether they're from a completely non-Muslim background coming into Islam, they do face a lot of different challenges, and language barriers is definitely one of them. So a lot of the time, a lot of the mosques and centres, they are run as though they're cultural community centres, and they don't always cater to all Muslims and all Shias. And I think a lot of the time, new Muslims can feel like outsiders. They may not always feel accepted and included because of this. So that's why I think it's really important to have a balance between, English lectures as well as Arabic or Farsi or Urdu, just so everyone feels included and accepted. Because with new Muslims, they may not feel the same connection because there's a lack of understanding with the language barrier. So I do think it's important to accommodate for everyone. And yes, I understand that these centres, they're often run by the elder generation who want to keep to the traditions. And that's fine to have like some lectures, Friday khutbahs, speeches in Ramadan and Muharram in Arabic, but just have the balance with English and Arabic as well. And yeah, and a lot of the time reverts, they're expected to, jump into everything straight away, follow Islam to the T, but that's not always maintainable or realistic, because especially if they're coming from a whole new different lifestyle, it's hard to just jump into everything. So it's good to take small steps. For example, the hijab, like a lot of Muslim women, when they come to Islam, they're expected to adopt the hijab straight away. And the thing with the hijab is, yes, of course, it's an obligatory wajib action, that's an act of worship, but, it takes a long time to, research the meaning and understanding. And I don't think revert sisters should be pressured into it, especially if they don't have the full understanding of why they should wear it and the meaning behind it. So yeah, I think it's important when when new Muslims enter Islam, they should be given the support and understanding as well. And obviously Islam is practiced differently all around the world. It can be quite overwhelming because there's so many different opinions out there, different sects, different schools of thoughts, and that can be quite overwhelming when someone comes to the truth and they're bombarded with so many different angles. So that's the thing, like every revert is on their own journey. And it's important to just, let them take things slowly and figure things out for themselves instead of putting cultural pressures on them, I think. Yeah.
That's really interesting as well. I love what you said about when you do enter Islam as a new Muslim, there are so many different scholars, madhab, sect. And it can be confusing. I guess that, a lot of the times they could be influenced by their surroundings, and it can take even another generation or even another few months and years for them to even enter into something that they fully understand, which is even different to what they originally started believing and practicing. And I don't know if there's anything out there that's saying, like, if you are, coming to learn the truth, like we're trying to have this platform, but again, it's very limited. And as a Muslim community as a whole, we are not sort of integrated in a center to say there's one space that you can come to and you can listen, because we do have so many different opinions, so many different schools of thought. So, I mean, how would you sort of like navigate around this sort of issue, Sheikh Haneef, when it comes to a new Muslim, coming in and wanting to find out, because that alone is a lifetime sometimes journey just to find, which sect, which area you're going to follow.
Well, I mean, I would. I don't think the issue is basically sect as such in terms of the problems that new
But that
Muslims
does add
face.
as to which cultural center you're going to go to, which group you're going to go to.
It's
As much as
true.
they're also divided with their language, they are very much divided in these centers because of that as well.
Yes.
It's caste, it's background, it's which country you come from, it's which sect you follow. If you pray in a certain way, all of that is looked upon, and we're not even addressing that issue. And these are the new Muslims that are saying that they are finding it difficult to actually, research and know which direction to go into. We're not
Yeah.
trying to say that there's one right or one wrong, but how would you even start that journey?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like personally, I don't try to convert people to Shiaism, right? I
No, of
mean,
course not. We're not
I,
doing that here.
I,
We have all sects of this background.
yeah,
On this show, we have
you
all
know,
types.
yeah. I mean, like, for example, I don't try to convert Sunnis to Shias. I mean, somebody comes to Shiaism or somebody comes to Sunnism. I think they have the same general types of problems. I think they have a little more problems with Shias. You know what I mean? And I think it's not because Shias are bad people or anything like that. I think because Shias are suffering from historical trauma, as being a
Okay.
threatened minority in the Muslim world. Okay, so Shias tend to be very, very much more inward looking than Sunnis. I think the Sunni attitude towards Islam is more like a kind of a triumphalistic type of Islam, whereas Shias tend to be a much more closed, type of practice. Not Shiaism itself, but Shia, the Shia
Followers.
community. You see, so and you can see it in universities. Okay,
Yeah.
there is a prayer room for both Muslim, but for all Muslims to pray. And the Wahhabis take over the prayer room, and the Shias just go in a little corner. You know what I mean? Which I cannot stand. you know, and I think all of this can be addressed with a proper mentorship. That when somebody comes into Islam, the people who they have associated with that is responsible for them coming into Islam, or the people who who have responded to their call to reach out to them. These people should be the ones to go with them to these centers and to explain to them what is happening, and to make them aware of these issues and how to deal with them and so on. And then it becomes pretty easy. So I remember I converted a brother to Shia.
Unfortunately, your internet is frozen. We will try and get the Sheikh back, but he has raised very many interesting points so far. And yes, we are a platform that have various background and sect, and it's just interesting to hear the actual opinions.
Oh yeah,
Sorry, we
I just got
lost you
I
for a
just lost
moment,
you.
Sheikh Haneef. We lost you for a moment.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So 1 second. Um, I remember I introduced somebody to Islam, and I brought him to Muharram, you know what I mean? And when after the speech, first of all, it was in a different language. Okay. So I had to sort of, explain that to him, you see? And then when the matab started, I said, look, this is gonna be wicked. So you have to condition their minds. You see, so mentorship is a very important thing. And then you have some, for example, new converts. Yes, you're right. Where, say, for example, they've converted to Shiaism, but they have never encountered a Wahhabi before. They think everybody as Muslim is a really good guy and stuff like that. And then you meet somebody who's telling them, like, what you are on is error and this and that. Okay, and so they need somebody to get some feedback from, to bounce ideas from, in order to overcome these types of things. So I think one of the most important things is that you need some kind of mentorship. You need some
Mhm.
group in your center to be able to welcome people, and that means us as Shias, especially heritage Muslim Shias, need to come out of that circle of wagons type of mode. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think you take a page out of the Christian's book. If a sister with full hijab goes to a Christian church on a Sunday, they meet the pastor or the priest or the vicar standing at the front door before the beginning of the sermon, welcoming everybody. And when he sees that person, he says, "Hello, you are new here. Why? Please welcome to our center." You know what I'm saying? And there might be somebody who might sit next to you who give you a smile and try to make you feel comfortable. All right. But you have a lot of
Yes.
our centers where you have a stranger who goes into the center and they look at their friend and they say, "Who is that? I wonder what they want." And blah, blah, blah. Because they are afraid, they are suspecting somebody. And this is not really a pretty good vibe, you know. So yeah, I think mentorship is a very important thing to get these converts comfortable. I think we have to remember that converts are extremely intelligent people because you choose Islam
Absolutely.
in general and choose Shia
Absolutely.
Islam in particular. These people read, they research, you know what I mean? They are critical, they are thinking. One of the things
Yes.
about the attitudes about converts, a stereotype they have about converts is that they're stupid. So we'll give them some little, I don't know, we call it in kind of grade 10 book, about know your Islam and some little stuff that is really an insult. You see, and what they need is some
Absolutely.
philosophy. You see what I'm saying? Some politics. That's what they need. To understand what is going on. To know what is going on. So I think that there's a certain type of a kind of I don't know a denigration, if you could call it that. A belittling or a belittling attitude towards converts, which I think is quite unwarranted. And I think they should treat them as people who might have even more intelligence than them, to tell you the truth,
I was just going to
because
say,
they
absolutely.
studied, you know what I mean, and they chose something. That when they went against their family, they went against their community, they went against everything, and they made that step. And this is no kid who's coming in there and needs some little picture book about Islam to be able to understand Islam.
No, definitely. I agree with everything you said, and I second that. And I do come across very much so. I'm blessed to meet many new Muslims who have actually practiced for many years or even coming into it newly, that they are literally leaving me in awe with the fact that they actually have the questions even ready before myself. And the fact that a lot of them, even without mentorship, have taken that journey because they were just curious and they weren't happy with regards to what they was just surrounded with, and they took that initiative very bravely and had the encouragement and had the actual blessing to go that extra step. And what I'm trying to highlight tonight especially is that when they do all of that and when they are coming to the community, unfortunately there is an expectation, there is a bit of hope, and a lot of them have seen past that because they don't really come into Islam when it's genuine for the other person, for even other Muslims. Even if we don't have the best representatives, unfortunately, they still continue quite nicely, in that path for many, many years. And we have raised that on the show as well. But it's just unfortunate that we cannot integrate more. And that's what we're trying to highlight tonight. So, Sara, coming back to you, what are the issues that we raised previously that you can highlight tonight? Because this is your chance, and this is really important that we hear your voice and all the different scenarios that's actually happening out there.
Okay, before I came onto the show, I did speak to a number of reverts to both, Sunni Islam and Shia Islam, and they all had quite similar experiences, unfortunately. And the issue raised that a lot of reverts like don't know anything. That's their expectation. They don't know anything, and it's quite a patronizing attitude because most reverts when they come to Islam, they've done extensive research into the religion beforehand, and a lot of the times they're asked, do you miss your old life and would you go back? And that's quite it's quite disrespectful and insulting to a revert because it's sort of questioning their commitment to the religion, and it's not right for others to treat them like that. If anything, they've sacrificed a lot to come to the religion, so respect and support should be given. And a lot of the time reverts, they have to adapt to a new culture, especially when entering a new community, even a new culture when they get married. And a lot of the time when a revert comes to a new culture, they're expected to just completely abandon their own cultural identity, when in reality that's not really Islam, because if components of their culture don't conflict with Islam, they shouldn't be expected to give that up, especially when children are brought into the picture. If a child is mixed race, they should celebrate both parts of their identity, and one culture shouldn't overpower another. Both should be respected. And I still think that's quite an issue that a lot of reverts face. They're just expected, oh, you're a Muslim now, you're one of us. But then the Muslims around them teach Islam in the way that their culture teaches them. So that's the thing, culture and Islam, they can interlink in a time and place. But if they conflict with one another, if one culture overpowers another, then that's where the issues lie. And in regards to marriage, speaking about marriage, a lot of converts do face issues with marriage because a lot of the time they're not accepted because of the divisive nationalism in society. And I can understand that some parents, they come to this country, they're from very strict traditional upbringings. They want to maintain the identity of their culture. They don't want their culture to be diluted. They want to keep the bloodstream pure and everything, especially if it's a Syed or something like that. However, that kind of attitude is discriminatory to reverts because a lot of the time they're often, they're only thought to be suitable with another revert and not a born Muslim. So, all these issues that reverts have to go through, it's a lot to deal with. That's why it's really important for them to be given, the support and acceptance as, other Muslims. And, yeah.
That's really interesting. And there's one point that I want to sort of touch upon because we are very much strict as to when you are Muslim. And I hear a lot of people saying if you are going to, for example, celebrate or even wish someone happy Christmas, it's a problem. And what about if half your family or majority of your family are still that? Like, say it, Sheikh, tell me, what is your opinion on that? Like, how do we maneuver? And obviously, it is very difficult when it's your own parents, it's your own brothers and sisters, it's your cousins that are actually in this sort of situation, and you're the only one who is a practicing Muslim. And when Muslims say, well, you're not allowed to even say happy Christmas or partake in a Christmas play or certain things, like I've had that in these WhatsApp groups and circles among sisters, which I have removed myself from completely now. And to be honest, they just consider themselves to be the entire Muslim population, only seeing things to a very tunnel vision when they're giving out these kind of I wouldn't want to say any sort of like a declaration, but it's really upsetting because it's like they only live in that glass bubble, and literally it seems like that's all they see. And when they say things like that, it really does show their level of knowledge and intellect about what's around them. Even living here, we're not adopting the West, but it's so scary that they say that if you were to do that you are doing that. So how would you maneuver around that if you are in a situation? What's your opinion on this? Because I really wanted to hear your
Well,
take.
I mean, look, I am one of four brothers. Three of us have embraced Islam. Two of us are Shias. One of us is a Sunni. You know, the rest of my entire family are Christian. My mother is a Christian. My mother only cooks halal food. Okay? I do not subscribe to the idea that Ahl Kitab are najis because I do not think it is wise and just to treat my mother as somebody unclean and I can't eat from her. My mother doesn't cook pork. She doesn't drink alcohol. And she only buys halal food because she has grandchildren that are all Muslim. Okay? And she loved to cook for me when I come to her house. Okay? Christmas time comes, and I tell you something, we all go to our mother's house and we have a Christmas dinner. Okay? I live here in London with my family. Okay? Come Christmas, we still cook a Christmas dinner. I am not going to engage myself on whether Jesus was born on the 25th or he was born on the 4th of July and all that type of stuff. Okay? They select a particular day for the birth of Hazrat Isa. Okay? He's a very prominent prophet, and there's no problem celebrating his birthday. You have Muslims who have this kind of insecurity, okay, about their children marrying converts because many of them think that converts are not solid Muslims. Okay, converts somehow are gonna go back to the pub or go back to the nightclub or something like that. Okay, and I think Sister Sarah, is a very good point that she made because the one of the most important areas for that cultural clash is in marriage. And there's this idea about maintaining the purity of the ethnic line, and the mother of the boy who is usually marrying a convert girl, wants to be able to talk to the children in Urdu or something, so they shouldn't marry some Gorasab or something like that. Okay, so they have this idea, right? Or Kala, right? So they have this idea, and I remember, there was one incident where this young Pakistani brother was in love with a European sister, okay? And this European sister, she's very intelligent, extremely intelligent, okay? She embraced Islam. She wore hijab, okay? And the boy's mother didn't want him to marry her. I'm talking to the boy's father, and he's saying, well, we need to have somebody who has a cultural affinity. They have cultural affinities with each other. And I asked him, I said, what is your son's culture? Do you think he has a culture? He has Pakistani culture? The man started to think, right? The boy doesn't even know to speak Urdu. When you ask the guy how he dresses, how he talks, how he thinks British.
Yeah.
So where are we going with this? If their own kid can't speak Urdu, do you expect their grandchildren to be able to speak it?
I'm just going to interrupt you quickly there, Sheikh. When it comes to that, it's really important actually what you've said, and I understand when it comes to adults, yes, they're in a particular way. What about parents who are scared about their young children, that if they have a family member enter to their house, which is not dressed appropriately, is not following the Islamic way, how do they receive that? Do they say, well, it's my house and I should choose who I should have in there because I'm influencing my children? So at the end of the day, we should not allow somebody who is not practicing, who says their religion. How do you respond to something like that?
Yeah, but that's a different story, right? We're talking about, for example, converts, who embrace Islam and who are serious about their Islam.
Yes, and they have their children. They have their children, maybe. And sometimes, which we can also apply this to our own Muslims, because we do have a very much of a judgment as to who we invite in our house and how it's being sort of relayed to our children. And if there was an aunt, there was someone who is, considered themselves in a particular way, but they didn't dress the way that you would normally dress, non-Muslim, non-hijab, or even hijab, but not the way you would, for example. How would you respond to that if they're not abiding in your own house and those rules?
Yeah, I mean, look, if they're living in your house, Okay, that's a different story. If somebody's coming to visit your house, it's something different. We live in a non-Muslim society. Okay, and in living in a non-Muslim society, we always are confronted with the choice of opening our doors to a non-Muslim. Always, I am confronted with that particular thing. Some tradesman wants to come to fix my fridge or something like that. He 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 might want to come in with his shoes on. I tell him, excuse me, take your shoes off. You see what I mean? It depends upon to what extent that person's behavior might infringe upon your Islamic etiquette or your Islamic values. And by and large, people, when they come into your house, usually are prepared to conform to your customs in your house. Most people are. You know what I mean? A tradesman come to my house and he doesn't want to take it. He doesn't want to take his shoes off. I tell him, go back through the door, because you don't have the right etiquette in a general sense to respect somebody's rules. You see, but when we're talking about converts, people who are striving in Islam. And they go to the mosque and they get married. And by the way, okay, black women converts are not easily do not easily find husbands in the Muslim community. A white Muslim convert might, but not a black Muslim convert, because many Muslims are racist. Okay, many of them are racist. It's a hidden thing. Okay, they are racist as making Bilal the only black person in Arabia. Right? you know, you know what I mean? And John, who smells bad, okay, all right, and who is an ex-slave. Most black Muslims are ex-slaves from these people's point of view. Yeah, when you start thinking about black people like that, you don't want them to come into your house. You don't want to marry your kids because you want the kids to marry an ex-slave. You see? But if people go to Medina, they will see how many of these local Muslims in Medina look very much like African Americans. It's quite interesting. But yeah, the family is, I think, where a lot of these cultural aspects take place. You know what I mean? For example, I'm not a racist, but I'd be really, really careful about my daughter marrying a Pakistani boy. You know what I mean? Because why? He might have an auntie, okay, or a mother-in-law, okay, that sees her as a servant.
Yes.
You see what I mean? Or
Yes.
not respect her. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want it to bring the ghetto out of me when that happens. You see what I mean? So we have to be really
Very, very interesting.
The Muslim community has to be self-conscious, about their
Absolutely.
attitudes, about their prejudices, and ask themselves, basically, is what I'm doing an Islamic thing? Sister Sara mentioned about this fetishism of being Syed, and that the idea of only Syeds can marry Syeds is a peculiarly Indo-Pakistani trait. You see, even Ulema among them defend this particular prejudicial type of thing, which is not rooted in Islam. So they have all these Sadat who are supposed to only marry Sadat. Well, you expect them to be ethnic Arabs who speak Urdu, but in fact they are ethnic Sindhis and Pakistanis and so forth, who are wearing black imamas. So how did they become ethnicized in this way? It had to be some kind of intermarriage between Arab Sadat and Indo-Pakistani Sadat. You see what I mean? And so, you have these types of superstitious types of behavior taking place that no one is doing anything about it, because I've never heard of any of them, except for one or two, going in a minbar and talking about this and trying to change that particular culture. I think Muslims, heritage Muslims especially, not the young ones growing up in the society, okay, but the older generation and some young people who are sort of like sucked into this, heritage Muslims especially, should be able to distinguish between Islam and non-Islamic culture. You see, and to be prepared to go against their prejudices and their preferences and to ally themselves with justice. The Holy Quran says to be just even if it is against yourself. And this is one of the problems that we have in our community.
I love hearing you, and honestly, I could hear you for hours when I do actually on your weekly programs that I do listen to. But the thing is, Sheikh, it's absolutely amazing what you raised, and it's so brave for you to speak like this, because you're right, it's not actually being addressed in the member, it is not actually being raised. And I'm so glad that we're having these kinds of discussions. Sara, was there anything else that you'd like to raise on these points so far? Because we have touched on quite a varied amount, but is there anything that I've missed and that we've spoken about before that you would like to raise? We've got, about 10 minutes left, and we can definitely use as much as we can with more of, your insight.
Okay, I really like the issues that you raised about, racism in the community, because it's so true that Black reverts do face the most racism because of issues of colorism, institutionalized racism, and it's not just about marriage either. Like a lot of the time when there's a sheikh speaking, they may prefer someone from a different ethnic background because they have more respect for one ethnic background over another. And then people forget that, asabiya, racism, tribalism. This is a forbidden sin in Islam, forbidden, and people have to be accountable for that when they're involved in that. And then, that's the thing. It's so prevalent within society, but no one's raising awareness on this issue. And a lot of the time, reverts do feel alone when they're not accepted in societies, and especially during Eid and Ramadan. When they practice, because they're not always invited to certain events and functions because they may have those language barriers, the cultural barriers there. And, it's especially if a revert has been abandoned by their family. For me personally, transitioning from one sect to another, my family being very open-minded. My family, because some of my family are Shia, some of them are Sunni. So it was always that the respect was always there, even though there's some tension here and there. I'm very lucky personally, but some reverts, they do experience, abandonment from friends and family. So that's when it's wajib on a community to give support for that revert brother or sister. However, we see a lot of the time they're neglected and they have to face these challenges on their own. And another issue I wanted to raise was, unfortunately, there's a lot of hypocrisy in the community, and a lot of the time people care about what would the community think compared to what will Allah think, because a lot of shady things happen behind the scenes that no one speaks about. People dealing dishonestly with money, all these things, people, tricking other people, manipulating someone, lies. A lot of revert sisters, unfortunately, that I know personally who've been affected by this, they've suffered because, so-called religious men in the community with the title, everyone loves them in the mosque, they're known. So they have that trust, they have that expectation of someone. And then a lot of the time, it's the same sisters that are manipulated to and not serious about marriage. And all these issues arise. It's a very taboo issue in the community because no one really wants to raise awareness on it. But it is there and it does happen. So what do you think could be ways to tackle this issue?
There you go, Sheikh. We have a lot of, I would say, and I'm going to bring it out there, there's a lot of spiritual abuse happening, and it does really go towards the revert sisters. And we have been ducking from this topic, and we do need a whole show on it. Because at the end of the day, there are certain individuals that get away from their name and status. They think they're rock stars or, associated with one, relatives of some, and they are protected. And these girls are neither taken seriously because they're not looked upon as virtuous, or they're not looked upon as serious enough because they are just reverts. So they are manipulated into coming into a marriage, promised, but not actually taken seriously. And then again, against the usual suspects have got their names out there. And unfortunately, no one's doing anything about it, especially amongst the scholars, especially amongst the leaders. So where do these women go to? Is there a safe space for them? I don't see one.
I think the community needs to organize that. You see, leadership, true leadership, is in the service of community. When that leadership abuses its position, then the people have to find their own leadership to counteract that. This is how it works, you see. And yes, you find that a lot of these women who come into Islam, They are abused. For example, the abuse of using temporary marriage for them, for example,
Yes.
and not having any kind of interest in permanent marriage with them. These types of things are abuse. And when you find that sometimes the big ones, the respected individuals in the society, do these types of things. How many Muslim women converts have left Islam because of
Oh,
seeing this type of
yes.
hypocrisy and so on that Sister Sara is talking about. These men, it's largely men, of course, will have to answer to Allah for this. But I think our community needs to organize themselves and act as a kind of a neighborhood watch, if one could call it that, a community watch, if you can call it that, to snuff these things out of the bud, out in the bud, to be able to confront these people and get them to be removed from these types of environments. We could go into other things like pedophilia and stuff like that also exist in the society, where people get away with it in the community. And this is why I think the community needs to definitely organize themselves and try to deal with these things if their leaders don't want to deal with it.
Thank you very much. That was really, really important issue to bring about, and I thank you, Sara, for that as well. Before the end of the show, I'd like to get some final thoughts from the both of you. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you both speak today, and we have highlighted very many topics actually from this one issue, and I think we are going to continue with the same topic next week, because we are trying to divulge into it in a much more deeper way, because it is much more sewn in from different perspectives, and the more perspectives we hear, and it does start with us discussion, discussing these kinds of things in order to open it up, to know that whoever thinks that they're going to get away, or whoever's not playing their part, whoever's not doing their responsibility and duty, well, there is no excuse. And we're not here to bash anyone or trigger anyone, but again, if you are triggered, then that is something you need to consider for yourself. So, Sara, what would be your final takeaway for this show?
I would say, there are lots of different cultural issues that reverts face, and I think it's important for more and to try and understand and tackle these issues, because a lot of the time it may not be intentional, it may not be malicious, but it's about having that understanding and extra support for them, because a lot of the time it isn't easy. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate you coming on today. It's really, really amazing to have young minds like yourself to actually speak on live TV, which is not easy to talk about these kinds of things. So I appreciate your time. Please do stay online even after the show. And also, I would like to have a minute or two of your time, Sheikh Haneef. Always a pleasure to hear your wise words, and you certainly don't hold back, and that's why I love to have you on the show. So what would your takeaway be for tonight?
I would say two words: open your arms and empower yourself. New reverts coming into your community, treat them with respect, love, and consideration for them, and empower yourself to be able to fight those backward types of thinking and abuse of power in our communities, especially in the area of family.
Thank you so much. We have had a powerful discussion today with an amazing panel of guests. I want to thank you all for watching. I want to thank my guests for taking their time out to actually give these kinds of insights. And I really do appreciate the support from all you dear